Okay, so first off, an introduction. Hi, I'm Callum. Actually, there's a lot of people who already know me because you all work here, so thanks for all supporting me. Much appreciated. I love the team culture here. I work at Celestia. I'm an engineer. And usually when I go about doing my talks, it's usually to explain something. Often I like to explain IBC, and more recently about how ZK can be used in IBC for rollups. I like to explain DA, and how that works, because for a lot of people it's just a little bit too complex, and it's actually a lot simpler. So in other words, I'm a bit of a mansplainer. I actually am guilty of really enjoying explaining things, and I'm sorry if sometimes I get too carried away. But unlike previous presentations, I'm actually going to diverge away from my mansplaining ways, and I actually want to give a slightly different talk. And it all starts from the fact that from a day-to-day basis, I'm usually get really stuck in the weeds. I often get really focused on whatever I'm doing right at the moment, whether it's discussing sort of gossiping mechanisms or congestion control. Sometimes I get really stuck in a bug and I really can't think of anything else until I solve this. And I think it's the same with a lot of us. It's a kind of a coping mechanism. In our everyday lives, we get stuck on the little things, and we sort of forget to take a step back. And so for this presentation, rather than trying to explain something else, I wanted to take a step back. I've been working in crypto for 5 years now, and I kind of wanted to present a sort of like personal perspective of where I think we're going, and perhaps how I think we should be kind of adjusting that, how I feel like we're kind of going in the wrong direction. So in other words, this is my sort of 10,000 foot view of crypto. And it's going to start more of like a history lesson that you guys are all familiar with, just as like a basis, but then I'll sort of go into my sort of views around this. They're all opinions, you can perfectly disagree with it, and happy to discuss this afterwards. So some basic knowledge here. So although the Bitcoin paper itself has a bunch of mysterious beginnings, we can kind of reasonably easily deduce why Bitcoin existed in the first place. Just 1 year beforehand, you had the GFC, the global financial crisis. So you had a global collapse of the financial markets. You had a lot of job losses, inflation, foreclosures on mortgages. It was a really unstable time. I was still in high school, so this really didn't affect me, but my mum was an example of someone who lost their job because of this, and then we sort of had to go through some tough times. And I didn't actually know that the Bitcoin paper came out a year later, but it did, and it was really in response to this GFC, in which we trust centralized authorities, and they had failed us. And so the main tenet about this, as well as just being a payment system, was this notion of being decentralized. Right, something that we didn't have to trust these centralized authorities. And other than that, it allowed for private payments, allowed you to keep in your privacy without everyone knowing what you're doing. And most importantly, the protocol was transparent and permissionless. Anyone could join, anyone could be a part of it. There wasn't some garden wall like there are in traditional finance. So these were the sort of like three sort of founding tenets of this sort of movement as a result of the unemployment, foreclosure, and inflation that I mentioned about. Now let's fast forward a few more years. The only other really feature unlock to this movement that I've seen came in 2014 with Ethereum. And Ethereum, unlike Bitcoin, which was just about a payment system, kind of generalized this. So it allowed it for programmable money. So now we kind of had feature parity with the existing financial system. So whereas you could do swapping, lending, margin trading, all of those things could now be ported across, and you had some way where you would decentralize a decentralized computation, like a decentralized computer. But if we fast forward an entire decade, we've had a complete explosion in the amount of chains. There is an incredible amount of tokens and an incredible amount of chains every single sort of day of the week. And basically all these things haven't really moved the crypto movement in any way. I don't think they've really made much change. All of them come onto the scene with one purpose only, and that is to say we scale. So it is almost as if we're a little bit embarrassed about the fact that in Bitcoin it was 7 transactions per second, and now we're trying to compensate this. And so every chain and rollup can sort of boast numbers equivalent to Visa or PayPal. Thousands and thousands of transactions per second. Whether they're actually getting filled is a different question. Now, for me, this was fantastic. I loved it. As an engineer, it's an engineer's dream. I could build whatever I want. And there was a lot of excitement in being able to take a lot of solutions that were in the 90s, especially around databases and distributed systems, stuff like sharding, and now applying them to web3. So great, engineers love that kind of problem, and a lot of engineers poured in, and most of the research diverted away from the centralization aspect of it, and basically how can we scale? And we need the scale to sort of reach the users. But if we look a little bit deeper, there's actually more to this. So there's been far more forking of software than networks. What I mean by this is the communities themselves don't split. The communities relatively have the same value. What happens is the engineers are splitting. So every single time we sort of want to make one sort of like change, we just create an entire new chain, an entire new token, and what we end up having is we get smaller and smaller tribes, us-them dynamics. And with these smaller and smaller tribes, how do you think we're going to reach the masses? When it's just a bunch of small squabbling groups trying to tell people that this is the right choice for them and the right path they should take. So it's actually us as engineers who are maybe the biggest fault, because rather than trying to like stay with existing systems and improve them, we've instead found the easier route and to sort of fork and start again. And there's been very few actual like on-chain forks. That's what I mean by the communities themselves don't fork. And so why is this the case? Well, we can sort of follow the money here. So capitalism sort of is put in place to reward the brave innovator. But it seems like in this industry, a lot of people can get away with innovation, which is not really much different from anything else. If you take a deeper look, and I'm sure you guys as engineers know this, most solutions out here are very much all the same. They just got slightly different flavors of it, slightly different opinions. And so the idea that we've become so opinionated about our infrastructure and that's caused communities to split and get smaller and smaller has been extremely detrimental. And we all use this in the guise of sovereignty. Hey, look, we're sovereign. When if I don't like what you want, I'm going to now move out and do my own thing. But the problem with that is we're not actually collaborating at all. And I know it takes a little bit more energy to collaborate, and so that's why it seems a lot more easier. But if you actually do some more collaboration, we'll actually have a more cohesive unit. And if you think about it, the amount of money that investors have poured into this, and it's all been diluted away into all these tiny little forks, if we actually had worked together and all that money was centralized all towards sort of like one focus, I'm sure it would have been a lot further forward in the actual research and engineering aspect of this. So this forking mechanism has actually slowed us down tremendously. So going back to follow the money, why do people do this? Well, it's kind of obvious, the token. It has been a lucrative mechanism, an insanely profitable mechanism that everyone does. And it's kind of funny, like if we take, after the Second World War, what the things that economists were talking about was this notion of a world currency. This was a really big topic back then. And a lot of them were talking about how you couldn't trust national governments and the fact that they might use it for their own use. And so instead we should have a world currency, one currency. It's not just about the fungibility aspect of it, it's about stability. Okay, now we fast forward to where we are now. What is the thesis that we try to put forward? It's not just about one token. We want millions and millions of tokens, right? A token for every single day of the week. And this completely counter to what the economists were thinking at the time, and what sort of led to things like the euro. The euro was the idea of instead of having all these small little tokens, currencies of the nation states of Europe, let's bring them all together. Okay, and so what the token has created is this kind of dynamic where if your business model is around a currency, and the way to make a currency valuable is to make people believe it's valuable, because that's how currencies work. We believe that there's some value to that currency, so we all invest into this. Then the focus comes more away from actually the engineering part of delivering the value, and can we convince people from a marketing angle that there is value to this. And so even if you're really good intentioned and you actually believe in some of the core tenets of the crypto movement, you can't help but actually realize that you're part of a pyramid scheme, where you're trying to sell more hype than for what you bought it at. Going back now to scaling. So as I mentioned beforehand, this was a dream of mine, to sort of just as an engineer, learn a lot of stuff about this. But it seems we've got this obsession now with improving the throughput and speed transactions and everything like this. As you said, a lot of the marketing you'll see for new chains is how many TPS it can go through. Now, do we really think that there is some sort of limit we will reach where all of a sudden everyday people will now move from the traditional banking sector and come across? Is there some sort of upper bound that we're going to reach until we actually go, oh, how come there are no users here? I think we're kind of deluding ourselves into focusing on just the research and the engineering and kind of missing the main point. And in recent times, we've gone even worse. So as beforehand, we were focusing on just the scaling part. Now what we've started to do is compromise on one of the core tenets beforehand, which is decentralization. So we've moved away from decentralization, and a lot of these new protocols that I'm seeing are far more centralized. They're relying on committees, on multi-sigs, on security councils, and whitelisted addresses. And even these proof-based chains, they're very slow to sort of think about the proofs, right? They look at Optimism. It's been 3 years since its launch, and they've only started to consider proofs now. Even some of the most promising things, like snarks, for example, they require a trusted setup. So in order to have your verify and prove a key in the first place, you do need to trust that that key was created in a safe way, they actually threw out the toxic waste. So people are telling me that this is only temporary, but I am seriously concerned that in our effort to sort of really reach this castle in the sky kind of throughput, we've actually compromised on the security of this. Okay, and we've made this mistake beforehand with centralizing. There's constant centralizing powers that we're having to sort of like fend off. And the one that I think is most known to all of you guys comes around like key management and wallets. I really think we kind of dropped the ball by not focusing on these things, and we allowed custodial accounts and centralized exchanges to come in. And so now there's a lot of like centralized entities which are like kind of in this area where it's unregulated, but just outside of the crypto, which is actually providing some like decentralized security. And this is where a lot of like the problems happen. Like look at SBF, and look at all these other like centralized exchanges, which is kind of given crypto this really bad reputation. So I've gone on my like rant for a while. Now I just want to like kind of pivot to the entire point of this conversation, which is going back to my mom, the user, the sort of people we've kind of like forgotten about. Let's take a look from their stance, taking a step back from the engineering. What do they view? Okay, when I talk to my grandma, she thinks they're magic beans. They think they're fake money. When I try to explain to her that national currencies are also fake money, they're fiat, they have no actual intrinsic value, she goes, well, fiat doesn't skyrocket up and down in value, and is not just the whole subject of speculation. And all these like pump and dump schemes. It seems like the Wild West out there in the crypto world. And even if they do want to try out our casinos, they want to start gambling a little bit of their money, it's not exactly clear to them how they actually get involved. And if they are involved, what are they actually doing, and why is it all for? So I think there is some like a lot of focus that we need to redirect towards actually telling users why they need this, why this is something valuable, because I don't think it's actually straightforward. And I think that's more the reason why you need to put more and more effort into it. Because if you compare what their current solution is, which is using traditional banking sector, everyone forgets that once every 30 years, the banking sector might fail spectacularly. And if for the rest of the time, they seem to be doing a reasonable job. So it's very hard to tell them that their centralized authorities are things that can't be trusted, and actually it's better to have these like decentralized protocols in place. Okay, now I know it's not the case. We're coming from our first world perspective where banks only fail once every 30 years as opposed to developing countries where the families and people need to try hold on their wealth far more because the decision makers in these countries don't really care about it. And I don't really want to get into this because it's a little bit ironic that us in our flash conferences are talking about helping poor people in developing countries. But I do think there is actually a valuable use case in this. The point that I'm trying to make here is it's not easy to convince why people need crypto. And therefore, rather than focusing on our like ambitions about, endless abundant blocks and endless supply of demand, that we should actually focus on what our users need. And I think there's a couple of mistakes that we're making. First of all, when we start communicating to people about these technologies, we focus on the technology itself, not on actually, and we kind of assume that by talking about the technology and explaining it, it'll be self-evident why it's helpful, why it's going to save the world, like who the users are and what difference it's going to make, when that's not actually the case. The second thing is we have this attitude of build it and they will come. Now this is something that kind of, all right, thank you. This is something that will come, this is something that is evident in the automobile industry, for example. Like once you have cars instead of horses, it's kind of obvious what the value is to the user. But the value proposition to the user of crypto isn't actually so clear. So you can't just assume that by building it and making it better and better and faster, that they will eventually reach a threshold where actually the users will be like, all right, this is exactly what I need. So it's not like the automobile industry. And what that means is we do need to go out and meet our users. We need to go out and work with who they are and what they need. So to summarize, crypto has been around for quite a while. And what we're starting to see is it slowly mesh back in with mainstream traditional finance. And so one of the things that I'm worried about is as we're trying to reach this like maturity level and we're trying to move away from all this like speculation and hype and actually have something that focuses more on the value and less on the tokenization of things. Will some of the initial values that crypto standard for, the decentralization, the privacy, the transparency, will they still be around? In 10 years' time, will we still have those things? Or will they kind of be like a mixed mash and it'll still be kind of something similar to the traditional banking sector? And we won't really have penetrated the mass markets. So from this, there's like 3 bullet points that I feel like are very important if we want to, in this like very critical time, as we're sort of approaching more and more mass adoption or like getting closer and closer to traditional finance, about what we should focus on. And the first one is kind of the hardest to convince people about this. As I said before, and it's insanely profitable, why would everyone want to change the strategy? But let's move away from tokenization. We need to find another business model. This is one of these like game theory situations where the Nash equilibrium is to have the greedy strategy. Everyone to focus for themselves, focus on creating a new token, and therefore funding your account. What you don't realize is how much that's damaging the industry as a whole. It's like a prisoner's dilemma where the actual end solution is if everyone's following for their greedy strategy, we end up with far more instability and far more people like being like, no, I don't want to touch this stuff. Then actually if we try find other business models that can support us. As I mentioned beforehand, don't fork and start again, improve existing systems. Go out there and try find a community that you associate with. A lot of people here amongst us share the same values and are all here for the same reason. So rather than trying to fork and have all this like interoperability problems that we create for ourselves, how about we try build in the existing systems? I know they're going to take a little bit more energy to get consensus, but that's the whole point. Finally, rather than like spinning up your single node testnets and trying to pull some crazy number on your TPS and advertising that, instead of focusing on the speed, focus on robustness, stability, and security. These are far more valuable things, I believe, to users than just the sheer number. All right, and most importantly, go to your users. You might actually find out that that real flashy, technical, cool solution isn't the thing that we're actually looking for. And so now here comes more of my like hypothesis about how it actually works. I'm an engineer, so maybe I have no idea, but this is how I've sort of gauged things. Crypto is more like HTTPS than it is the mobile phone. So what I mean by this is the mobile phone was a pervasive technology that everyone was aware about. Everyone saw everyone else with a mobile phone. They wanted that mobile phone. It really unlocked a lot to their life. It made a difference. I actually think crypto can make a huge difference to people's lives, but it won't be in the same way. It won't be something that's so visible. It'll actually be something that is similar to HTTPS, which is prior to that, the internet was just HTTP. It had no encryption. The S stands for secure. And you don't notice it, but every single time you're typing something in your URL, it actually has that S there. And that means we've secured the internet, I'm just using blanket terms here, without sort of people realizing this. And this is where I think crypto will come into play. I think a lot of it, people won't actually understand that you have changed their lives. They won't realize that you've protected them from the centralized authorities that maybe once every 30 years collapse spectacularly. It'll be all underneath. And so that's where I think crypto is heading. And so with that in mind, what I feel like as engineers we need to be focusing on, rather than just the speed aspect of stuff, is let's try have a system where the user verifies everything every time and without them even knowing it. So it looks as if they're still using the same banking system. It looks like they're still using the same Airbnb, Splitwise, Ticketmaster, whatever you name it that could be decentralized. They just don't realize that they're better off because they're in a much more secure because of decentralization. So to sum it up, I named this talk a letter to the next generation because I feel like this current generation has been going the wrong way. We've been too focused on this like research and engineering and trying to like sort of have this castle in the sky sci-fi dream of what we feel like the future will be. We're really like enamored by the movement, and I don't think this is the case. I think we need to take a step back and actually take a more user-centric focus. I think we should still try to keep those core values and make sure that they are alive, but actually go and meet the users as where they are. So this is my thing to the next generation. What I wish I was focusing more on was actually how can I help people now that I take a step back from my like gossiping protocols that I'm working on, and sort of like actually make more of a difference, because I feel like that's more important to me. Thank you.